Okay, we're finishing up on this old reverber rocket. You can see here, now that I've confirmed the polarity of the output transformer, I've got the negative feedback and positive tied in here, the negative going to ground here, and I have tinned these two terminals, and it will accept speaker wire just fine for installation in the actual amp. If there had been space in the chassis, I would have preferred to have installed a 1/4-inch jack, but there just really is not. So this is going to be better than factory and more than good enough. Some changes to the Tremolo circuit. I increased a resistor which is between these two caps from 120K to 470K. And I added a resistor here between the B+ plate connection and the cap going out to feed the intensity. That's similar to what you see in a Fender Princeton. And that just decreases the intensity. It still has plenty of intensity, just takes out some of the thudding. Speaking of decreasing thudding, I changed the output coupling caps from the 100 nanofarads to 10 nanofarads, and that raises the negative 3 dB point from 5 hertz to 50 hertz. And that's a nice change. It's still flat to almost an octave below the fundamental of a guitar, which is 82 hertz. But it's not down to 5 hertz, and that really reduces the thudding of the tremolo. Let me show you a few other changes. To give this tremolo circuit a much more usable range of speeds, I replaced the 500K pot with a reverse audio 3 meg pot with a resistor. I think it's just a 10K, 15K. I can't read it for right now with the camera in front of me, limiting it. So it has pretty much the same max speed as the stock circuit, but it will go much, much slower. I'll let you hear that later. And it's nice without all the boom, boom, boom. Now the filtering in this circuit was far from perfect, even with some changes that I made. I put in a 30-20-20-20 multi-section can cap there, and then 2 additional ones in the preamp that you've already seen. But it still had quite a bit of ripple. And due to the ground scheme and how everything was in here, it just wasn't optimal. So I've got some 22 microfarads rather, in parallel across the plate, anode, and screen nodes. So instead of 30-20-20-20, this is now 50-40-20-20, and the hum is dramatically reduced. On that subject, when I first tested the amp, it had the very, very old 7591As, and they were noisy. And I wanted to know how much of the noise was filter caps, some of it was, versus the old tubes. Cathode biased amp like this, if they're mismatched, you can never get it quiet. So it's got these tongue saws, and that dramatically lowered the hum. These are much better matched. I've spoken to the owner. These are going to ship out with the amp. Good choice. The old ones, they're just not well matched for this circuit. In some other circuit, they'd probably be fine. But cathode bias requires a lot of good matching. If you don't have good matching, you don't have good common mode cancellation, and you will hear hum and ripple, etc., etc. Let me show you a few other tweaks before we do an overview. In the previous video, I mentioned that the 5-watt bias resistor was getting too hot for my liking. So here's a 10-watt resistor, and I've got it elevated up to really keep it away from this bypass cap, so this cap does not get baked by any heat this might have. Non-original to the amp, but crucial, I've added a 5-watt 470 ohm common resistor to both screens of the power tubes. That's equivalent to adding a 1K 2.5 watt to each, and that does help make the 7591As run more happily with modern wall voltages. Many of the comments on the previous videos kept telling me to take out the red Astron that was here. Now the red Astron that was here was a 200 volt cap, and there's nowhere close to 200 volts. It's a cathode bypass cap, probably had like 2 volts on it, and the other end of it was going to ground. So it wasn't a situation where you'd really have DC leakage. But since red Astrons can fail, and not all the failures are leakage modes, I did take one of the 100 nanofarad caps, same value, that had been in the phase inverter output, and put it in this position, and that red Astron will get returned with the other original parts that are out of the amp now. Now, in most amps that come in with red or yellow Astrons, particularly 50s and early 60s Fenders, I do replace them on site. There's no point in measuring them because usually they're in a situation where there's quite a bit of voltage and they will fail. In this case, it has not. This Solon cap here was in the amp when it came in. It's non-factory, but it's a fine choice and it can stay, though visually it does stand out quite a bit. Let me show you the last major change to the amp. This is a little bit tricky to show without dragging another light over here, but just two capacitors. The tone circuit in this amp is essentially that of the 5E3 Deluxe by Fender, but did not sound as good. The capacitors used originally in this amp were a 2 nanofarad for the treble boost and a 10 nanofarad for treble roll-off. And both because the treble roll-off was so massive and the taper of the pot put it in such a place that this counteracted this to a large degree, and that the 2 nanofarad really did not give the idea of more treble, just more upper mids. It just wasn't sounding very good, so I changed them out to the 4.7 nanofarad and 500 picofarad. They would be familiar to anyone with the Fender Tweed Deluxe 5E3. And this sounds a lot better. Now, before making any of these changes to the tone stack or the tremolo, etc., I spoke, and the owner wants a great playing amp rather than a collector's piece. Now, with old Ampegs, original condition sometimes is fantastic. Oftentimes, it does not sound good at all. This was one of those times.